Good morning and welcome to today's hearing on Hong Kong's Summer of Discontent and U.S. policy responses. This is the second China Commission hearing this year on the situation in Hong Kong. During our May hearing, the Commission heard compelling testimony from Hong Kong pro-democracy advocates, including Martin Lee and Nathan Law, who expressed serious concerns about the extradition bill that was quickly moving towards becoming law at that time. That legislation would have put anyone in Hong Kong, including U.S. citizens, at risk of extradition to mainland China. Over the last 16 weeks, millions of people from all walks of life in Hong Kong have taken to the streets in an unprecedented and sustained show of unity. The protesters have inspired the world and have risked their lives, their health, their jobs, and their education to fight for the future of Hong Kong. Thank you for your courage and thank you for your bravery. We stand in solidarity with you. As protests continued throughout the summer, Hong Kong police used excessive and unnecessary force to target those engaged in peaceful demonstrations. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has called for an investigation. The UK has suspended export licenses for the sale of tear gas and crowd control equipment. In the House of Representatives, Congressman Chris Smith and I have introduced H.R. 4270, the Protect Hong Kong Act, that would prohibit U.S. exports of police equipment to Hong Kong. U.S. companies should not be selling equipment used to violently crack down on pro-democracy protesters. I hope Congress will pass this legislation as soon as possible. The One Country, Two Systems framework was enshrined in the 1984 Sino-British Declaration and Hong Kong's basic law. This is an international treaty signed by the Chinese government to allow Hong Kong a high degree of autonomy with the ultimate aim of electing its chief executive and legislative council members by universal suffrage. The 2014 umbrella movement protests were sparked by the Chinese government reneging on its commitment to make Hong Kong more democratic. It is the continuing erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy and rule of law that fuel the protests in Hong Kong today. Over the last 5 years, the Chinese government has prioritized control over Hong Kong by stifling free expression and restricting the space for democratic participation. We have seen the prosecution and sentencing of pro-democracy leaders, the disqualification and removal of pro-democracy legislators, and the introduction of a new national anthem bill that would restrict free expression. U.S.-Hong Kong relations are governed by the U.S.-Hong Kong Policy Act of 1992 that commits the United States to treating Hong Kong as a separate customs territory from the rest of China, so long as Hong Kong remains sufficiently autonomous. I'm proud to support H.R. 3289, the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act sponsored by Senator Rubio and Congressman Smith. The legislation would require the Secretary of State to certify on an annual basis that Hong Kong is sufficiently autonomous in order to justify special economic, financial, and trade treatment different from mainland China under U.S. law. Over the years, Hong Kong has prospered and become the financial center of Asia because of its strong commitment to the rule of law, good governance, human rights, and an open economic system. The erosion of this unique system threatens not only the people who attempt to speak out, but the economic vitality of the city itself. So to be clear, we stand together with the people of Hong Kong and indeed all the people of China when we express our concerns about the human rights violations of the Hong Kong and Chinese governments.
Thank you very much, and what a panel of heroes, the best and the bravest and the brightest. Thank you for being here and bearing witness to a very ugly truth as to what Hong Kong is doing. It has been a long, hot summer in Hong Kong, as we all know. The inspiring and courageous protests there are a daily reminder of the stark differences between free and authoritarian societies. The people of Hong Kong have shown the world that a free people will not accept the boot of repression without protest.
I say frame it.
The millions of Hong Kong protesters have also done the world a great service. They have exposed Beijing's plan to erode freedoms guaranteed to the people of Hong Kong by international treaty. They have exposed Beijing's pernicious and repressive behavior. And make no doubt about it, the Chinese government is both uniquely repressive and incredibly paranoid about maintaining its grip on power. Today, there are over 1 million Uyghurs interned in Orwellian political education camps. Human rights lawyers have disappeared and been horribly tortured in detention. Christians, Tibetans, and labor activists and journalists as well face egregious abuse and the most intrusive system of surveillance operating in the world today. Blaming the United States government and blaming the U.S. Congress for the protests is an act of cowardly propaganda. It is time for the U.S. policy to respond to Beijing's long-term ambitions in the Hong Kong and pass the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. 5 years ago, Mr. Chairman, I introduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act with my CE co-chair, Senator Brown. The bill allows for a more robust U.S. response to the steady erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy and human rights. Over the years, Senator Rubio and I have upgraded the bill, and you as well, to reflect the kidnapping of booksellers, the disqualification of elected lawmakers, the political prosecutions of Joshua Wong, Nathan Law, Benny Tai, and others. However, every single time we pushed for passage, there was opposition from the diplomats, the so-called experts, the committee chairs in both the House and the Senate, and the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. We were told not to upset the status quo. We were told that upgrading U.S. policy would undermine their efforts with Beijing and its hand-selected political leaders in Hong Kong. We were told that our bill would cost U.S. businesses. It is the exact same advice that we have been hearing on China since Tiananmen Square. And the big issue was then MFN. China experts have failed the American people, and their advice helped to gut parts of our own economy. Their advice this time will fail the people of Hong Kong as well. This commission and so many of our colleagues in both the House and the Senate stand united with the people of Hong Kong and will not be silent in the face of threats to their continued liberties, guaranteed liberties, and way of life. The U.S. and the international community cannot be silent or just make noise with nothing that backs it up. The whole world has a stake in a peaceful and just resolution of Hong Kong's and the survival of the one country, two systems model. Hong Kong people, yayo. There is no disputing the fact that under Xi Jinping, human rights abuses have seriously worsened. You name the area, from torture, religious freedom. Ms. Holm, you talked about the synodization of religions, where every single religion or faith, including the Falun Gong, Christians, Tibetan Buddhists, the Uyghurs, all have to comport to the communist model or else face severe torture, incarceration, and even death. It is incredible what he is doing and his regime. And of course, all of that will be imposed on Hong Kong unless there is a reversal of this trend. On human trafficking, the Trump administration has designated China as a Tier 3 country because of sex and labor trafficking. It has gotten seriously worse over the last several years. So every place you look, it is worse. Xi Jinping is bringing dishonor to himself and to his government with his abuse of people. And I think we need to say that loud and clear. You know, the great father of democracy, Wei Jingsheng, once said, and I had him at a hearing, and I actually met him in Beijing when he was let out briefly to get Olympics 2000, which the Chinese government didn't get. So they rearrested him and beat him almost senseless. Well, he said, you know, you Westerners don't get it. You do coddle dictatorship. You do allow and enable by your weakness. You've got to look a dictatorship in the eye and say, we're not kidding. Conditionality of human rights either occurs or we're not going to be trading with you and allowing you to use that economic power that you get to further incarcerate and further repress. You know, the lessons of the Soviet Union were not learned when it came to China. I got elected in 1981. My first trip was to Moscow and Leningrad on behalf of Soviet Jews. And frankly, the Reagan administration stood up strongly to the powers in Moscow and said, human rights matter. And it did matter. And thankfully, we saw a change. Of course, under Putin, it's still bad, but not as bad as it was during those years. I raise all of that because when it came to China, we have not learned the lessons of conditionality with regards to human rights. And I say that with sadness, with great sadness. Deeply concerns me that we just keep not learning the lessons. Nancy Pelosi, Frank Wolf, David Bonnier, and I all opposed MFN for China after Tiananmen Square. George Herbert Walker Bush thought he could manage the whole thing. He was our ambassador to China. And as it turned out, we managed it extraordinarily poorly. Bill Clinton came in and he said, let's link human rights with MFN trade. 1 year later, he delinked it. And the lesson learned by the dictatorship in Beijing was profits trump human rights. We now, and I have tried for 5 years to get my bill passed, our bill, it's a collective bill, House and Senate, bipartisan, and the same people who said just trade more and somehow China will matriculate from dictatorship to democracy have been proven wrong again. And if it wasn't for the great people of Hong Kong standing up so powerfully at great loss of their liberty, going to prison, being arrested, being harassed, and even killed and tortured, that this Congress needs to wake up and say, finally, at long last, we're going to put conditionality on this.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you to the witnesses. We are so grateful to all of you for the information you've given us here today and for shining a light on this. I know we sit here in this chamber. It's very calm. It's very safe. It's very sterile. And you're bringing to life what's going on in real people's lives right now. When you talk about a 12-year-old being arrested, when we hear the idea that someone gets pepper spray sprayed into their wound, when we hear about people's heads being smashed into the concrete and getting concussions, and we hear about the rubber bullets and the tear gas and everything else, and people living in fear on a regular basis for standing up, for speaking their minds. Here in the United States of America, we've believed since Nixon went to China, that the more that China was exposed to our way of life in the United States and to the West, that they would become more like us. We always thought they'd become, if they saw capitalism, they saw democracy, sooner or later they'd become more and more like us. And we now know that that's not at all the case. Whether the hearings we've held about the Uyghurs, or the hearings about Tibet, or now about Hong Kong, we know that they're pulling. We talk about Hong Kong as being one country, two systems. It's really one world with two models, and they're meeting each other in Hong Kong right now. And the question is which model is going to win? Is it going to be the model that we promote here in the United States with the rule of law and with freedom of expression and with democracy, or is it going to be authoritarianism and the powerful forces of the government doing whatever they want, whatever way they want? They're meeting right there, and you're right in the middle of that challenge right now. So we're so grateful to all of you.
I just have a statement to make, and I regret I'm going to have to leave after this, but I wanted to say thank you, Mr. Wong. Thank you, Ms. Ho, for your courage, for your resolve, for your leadership in the face of great trial and tribulation. Thank you for the example you are setting for the world and for all that you're doing for freedom-loving peoples. I want to send a message to Beijing's communists. And my message is you cannot have it both ways. You cannot seek to trade with the wealthy nations of the world and rip off our intellectual property. You cannot seek to be a trusted international development partner and engage in predatory economic practices through your Belt and Road Initiative. And you cannot reap all the economic benefits that you enjoy under American law of Hong Kong's special status while undermining your rights as Hong Kongers, while eradicating your political identity. We cannot allow this to happen. So I look forward to working with you. I will be signing on to the legislation offered by the co-chairman of this committee, as you have encouraged us to do so. And I'll be seeking other opportunities, perhaps in the immigration area, to provide further relief to Hong Kongers who do not want to be a part of this predatory regime that calls itself communist, but in fact is really fascist in many respects. And we must continue to press it to change its behavior. Thank you so much for your presence here.
Today marks a significant day in United States history. It was 232 years ago on this very day that our forefathers signed the United States Constitution. So it's, I think, with some significance that we welcome you here today to the United States Congress, the House and the Senate, to share your testimonies and as you share in this struggle, this global struggle of humanity for freedom and independence. So
that Constitution, signed 232 years ago today, created a federal system, one with a Senate and a House, that oftentimes, by design, there's some tension between these two bodies. It created three branches of government: an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. It's an outgrowth of that system is our two political parties that oftentimes also struggle for our ideas to move forward. It created a system of a federal system with now 50 states that also there's a healthy tension, sometimes unhealthy, but there's a tension between that system as we struggle to move forward ideas and a rule of law. One thing that I think is important to note, though, is that we all stand together. This is a legislative and executive branch that we stand together, Republicans and Democrats, in support of the struggle for human rights, for the rule of law, and for freedom for Hong Kong. And I would echo the sentiments that have been expressed earlier, that we cannot have it both ways. We cannot have a rule of law and human rights and the struggle for freedom with the actions that we see that are undermining the very nature of that system in Hong Kong today. And so it's incredibly troubling to me to see what we have seen play out over the last 6 months. So I'd like you to comment on Mr. Wong, and let me commend all of you who are examples and the founders of freedom, whose names I hope will be remembered 232 years from now in the struggle for freedom in Hong Kong. But Mr. Wong, Ms. Ho, Mr. Chung, and Ms. Hom, for your efforts and struggles for Hong Kong.
Thanking you all. It's hard for us to conceive of the courage that it takes. There's no doubt that in this room today is someone reporting to Beijing about each of your testimony.
Right. That's right.
So
please make sure we're stated properly. I don't want any misquotes.
And I want to thank you for your courage to speak the truth. And hopefully we will be able to pass some of this legislation to make it clear to the regime in Beijing that democracy is an important value, and that we're just not going to pay lip service to it. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
As many of you know, I spent more than 5 years living in Guangzhou, and part of that time in Hong Kong. Back in the 1990s, when I was in the private sector, raising a family. In fact, we have 4 children. Our 2 youngest children were both born in Hong Kong. I'm deeply concerned with the ongoing erosion of autonomy and human rights in the region, and I will tell you, I stand with the citizens of Hong Kong. As the leader of the free world, we, the United States, and the entire world must continue to support the autonomy and the freedoms of Hong Kong. It is one country, 2 systems. I was in Hong Kong on June 30th, 1997, and saw the Union Jack come down for the last time. The Hong Kong central government needs to work with protesters to accept the demands put forward by the citizens of the country, and the use of excessive force by the police must end immediately. We must continue to work together towards building a strong relationship between our 2 countries.
You know, Congressman Smith, earlier on in the hearing, referenced kind of the past inactions by the U.S. government in response to human rights abuses in China, and we've kind of looked the other way, or we've thought more trade would do it, or more this would do it, or whatever. Really, things haven't got any better. Things are continue to get worse. And I think it's fair to say that, for the most part, the U.S. government has been very good at kind of talking the talk. When it comes to Tibet, we issue the obligatory statement that we respect the rights of the Tibetan people to practice their religion, and we respect His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but the repression continues and there's no consequence. And I think part of what we're trying to do is change that. Just talk in and of itself doesn't end up changing anything. There needs to be a consequence. And so we're trying to move legislation forward that would impose that consequence. And I think it was very clear from everybody here that the Protect Hong Kong Act and the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act are important. And I believe, and I can probably give you an assurance, that we will do that. I mean, it doesn't happen here overnight. Senator Rubio talked about hearings that are happening in the Senate. We have assurances from the relevant committees in the House that they will move on this, and I believe they will come to the House floor, and they will come to the Senate floor, and they will receive bipartisan support. And so that will happen. So we get the message on that, and that is, and we will follow through. So we have our assignments. And but on this issue, we're in solidarity with you. We believe that the future of Hong Kong ought to be determined by the people of Hong Kong. And again, I can't thank you enough for being here. So thank you, and this hearing is adjourned.